The galaxy is full of stories. Tales of empires rising, mighty fleets stretching across the stars, and countless species competing for power and survival. Worlds were conquered, civilizations fell, and new rulers claimed the ashes of those before them. Yet among all these countless wars, there was one planet that stood apart. It was not the strongest. It was not the most advanced. In fact, many called it weak, divided, and strange. That planet was Earth. To an outside observer, Earth seemed fragile. Blue oceans covered most of its surface, and scattered across its land masses were small nations that argued and fought with each other. Instead of a single united empire, humanity lived divided, often clashing over borders, beliefs, or resources. To alien eyes, this looked like chaos. It made Earth appear vulnerable, easy prey for any species bold enough to strike, and yet, for century after century, no one tried. Fleets that marched across other systems avoided Earth. Empires that had no problem enslaving weaker races never laid claim to it. Explorers who mapped the stars left the planet alone. From a distance, Earth looked defenseless, but somehow it remained untouched. This mystery began to spread among alien species. In the markets of far-off colonies, in the halls of great councils, and in secret gatherings of warlords, the question was whispered again and again, why does no one conquer Earth? Some believed there was a hidden guardian, a secret protector that shielded humanity. Others thought perhaps Earth held a hidden weapon so powerful that no one dared risk waking it. And then there were those who laughed, calling humans too primitive to be worth the effort. But beneath the laughter, even the skeptics avoided testing their theories. It was as if some unspoken warning traveled through the stars, a warning no one wanted to challenge. From space, Earth did not shine with great orbital fortresses or fleets of warships. Its skies carried only satellites, communication arrays, and stations that seemed insignificant compared to the armadas of the galaxy. Its cities, while bright and busy, were small compared to the megastructures other species had built. Its people were many, yes, but their lives appeared ordinary, working, farming, inventing, arguing, dreaming. Nothing about them suggested danger. Yet those who studied closer began to notice something unusual. Humans lived with conflict in a way most species did not. Where other civilizations had fought wars in their early history and then settled into peace, humanity never seemed to escape the cycle. Wars on Earth were constant. Small ones, large ones, wars of nations, wars of ideas. Each time, destruction followed. Cities burned, societies collapsed, and yet somehow the people always rebuilt. From ashes, they rose again. From ruins, they created something new. This pattern repeated so many times that it became a part of who they were. Observers from afar began to call this trait both frightening and fascinating. For while humans destroyed, they also created with the same intensity. They invented machines not only to kill, but also to heal, to explore, to connect with one another. They dreamed of the stars long before they had the technology to reach them. Their imagination ran far ahead of their capabilities, and in that imagination burned a restless fire. One alien scholar, writing in his private journals, described it like this: "The humans are fragile, yet unyielding. They bleed, but they continue. They destroy, but they rebuild. They are not like the others. There is something in them that does not break." His words were quietly shared among intellectual circles until the idea took root across the galaxy. But outside of scholars and thinkers, the warlords and conquerors of the galaxy noticed something else. Humans possessed weapons unlike those of many other worlds. They had forged devices of terrible power, machines capable of wiping out entire cities in seconds, weapons born not from galactic conquest, but from fighting each other. To alien generals, this made little sense. Why would a species threaten its own existence? Why risk annihilation over internal disagreements? To them, this looked reckless, even suicidal. But the more they thought about it, the more unsettling it became. If humans could do this to themselves, what might they do to an invader? That question began to hang in the air, heavier with every passing decade. Earth remained divided, yes, but it also remained fiercely protective of its independence. No empire controlled it. No foreign power held its skies. Despite their differences, humans always pushed out when threatened. Even in their own history, when empires rose and tried to dominate, they eventually collapsed under the weight of human resistance. It became clear that humanity carried something many species had lost: a stubborn refusal to bow down. For some, aliens, this stubbornness looked dangerous. For others, it looked inspiring. And for those who once considered invasion, it looked like a warning. Still, there were always whispers of doubt. Could it be that Earth was only lucky? Could it be that no empire had yet chosen to make the first move? From time to time, ambitious warlords entertained the idea. They calculated the risks, they studied Earth's defenses, and they prepared their fleets. But somehow, every time, those plans ended before they began. Some claimed their leaders lost their nerve. Others said their spies reported disturbing things about human behavior. And some, in hushed voices, spoke of an instinct, a feeling that to strike Earth would be to strike something far more dangerous than it appeared. And so Earth's legend grew. A planet with no empire, no fleets, no galactic rule, yet one that no one dared to touch. The galaxy continued to watch, continued to whisper, continued to wonder. And the humans, most of them unaware of the eyes upon them, continued their lives, arguing, laughing, building, dreaming, and reaching for the stars. But for those who watched closely, one truth was becoming clear. Humanity was not dangerous because of its weapons. It was not dangerous because of its armies. It was dangerous because of its spirit, the restless fire that made it impossible to break, even when it looked like they were on the edge of collapse. This truth lingered like a shadow across the galaxy. Quietly, in the minds of leaders and generals, one thought returned again and again. Perhaps that is why no one dares conquer Earth. For years, Earth remained untouched, watched quietly from afar by species who debated endlessly about its nature. Some called it dangerous, some called it chaotic, and others believed it was only a matter of time before someone decided to claim it. That moment almost came sooner than anyone expected. The galaxy, after all, was never at peace for long. Empires rose with hunger, always looking for the next source of resources, labor, or territory. Worlds were swallowed up one after another, often without resistance. The smaller civilizations, the ones who lacked fleets or advanced weapons, became easy prey. It was the way of things, at least for those who saw power as survival. Among these powers, there was once a coalition of warlords who dreamed of expanding their reach further than ever before. They had taken systems at the edge of their territories, and now their eyes turned toward the blue world orbiting a yellow star, Earth. To them, it looked like an easy opportunity. Divided nations, no unified fleet, no great planetary defense shield. It appeared defenseless. The temptation was strong. If they could claim Earth, they would gain a planet rich with water, fertile land, and countless resources. The humans themselves, they assumed, would be easy to manage, fragile creatures compared to other galactic species. At least, that was the image their spies painted. Reports showed humans arguing among themselves, building weapons not for alien threats but for one another. It looked like a weakness that could be exploited. The Council of Warlords debated for weeks. Some were eager to strike quickly before another empire claimed the planet. Others hesitated, reminding the group of the strange stories surrounding Earth, the unspoken warning carried through whispers across the stars. But greed is a powerful force, and slowly, hesitation began to give way to ambition. One night, their fleets were quietly assembled. Dozens of warships gathered in the dark, preparing to make the jump toward Earth's star system. The plan was simple. Appear suddenly in orbit, overwhelm Earth's satellites, and demand surrender. If humanity resisted, they would strike hard and fast, leaving no chance for recovery. To them, this seemed like the perfect plan, one they had used on other worlds many times before. But there was a problem none of them truly understood. Earth was not like other worlds. When the Coalition's scouts arrived at the edge of the solar system, they began sending back reports. To their surprise, Earth was not as blind to the stars as they believed. Humans had machines orbiting their world, machines that could see far into space, machines that tracked movements across the void. The warlords realized they had been spotted, long before they could arrive unnoticed. Humanity had already seen them coming. Back on Earth, governments scrambled. Messages rushed across nations. For all their divisions, for all their endless disagreements, something happened that rarely occurred. They began to cooperate. Tension was high, fear was real, but beneath it burned a determination. They had argued with each other for centuries, but when an outsider appeared at their doorstep, humans found a way to stand together. The Coalition's warlords, watching from a distance, were unsettled. They had expected panic, chaos, and confusion. Instead, they saw preparations. They saw defenses activating, satellites repositioning, and aircraft standing ready. They even intercepted broadcasts filled with words they could not fully understand. But the tone was clear. This was not surrender. Even stranger were the things their spies reported about human psychology. Instead of breaking under fear, humans seemed to grow stronger in it. Stories began to spread across Earth about resistance, about survival, about sacrifice. People who had never spoken before now stood shoulder to shoulder, united by the threat above their skies. The warlords debated again. Some argued that the humans were bluffing, that all this was only noise and show. Others felt a creeping unease. They had seen species collapse under far less pressure, yet the humans were not collapsing at all. If anything, they were becoming more dangerous. The Coalition decided to send a message. A fleet approached Earth and demanded surrender, broadcasting their dominance across the planet. For a long moment, silence followed, and then, to their shock, the humans answered. They did not plead for mercy. They did not offer tribute. Instead, they responded with defiance. Their words were simple but powerful. If you come, we will fight. That was the first true test. To most species in the galaxy, such words would have been laughable. What could a divided, less advanced planet possibly do against an interstellar fleet? But there was something in the human voice that unsettled the invaders. It was not bravado. It was not arrogance. It was conviction. The Coalition tried to shake them with threats. They displayed their weapons, demonstrated their power in nearby space, even destroyed an empty satellite as a warning. But humanity did not yield. The humans simply adjusted their strategies, moving faster, preparing for every possible strike. Instead of fear, there was resilience. Instead of silence, there were broadcasts filled with determination. For the warlords, this was unexpected. On other worlds, this show of force had always been enough to bring submission, but Earth was different. The more they threatened, the more the humans hardened. And behind that hardening was something even more troubling: creativity. Humans began experimenting with tactics that no one else would have considered, turning their limited technology into tools of resistance. The longer the standoff continued, the more the warlords argued among themselves. The temptation to conquer Earth was still there, its resources, its position, its potential. But for the first time, they began to doubt whether the cost was worth it. What if the humans did the unthinkable? What if they unleashed their own terrible weapons, not caring if it destroyed themselves in the process. That thought chilled them, because if humanity was willing to risk everything just to resist, then victory would never be clean. It would never be simple. And even if the warlords managed to crush Earth, the cost might break their coalition apart. So the fleets held their distance. Days turned into weeks, and still, no attack came. The humans remained ready, watchful, unyielding. And the warlords, once filled with ambition, now began to retreat into doubt. Finally, after long debates and secret arguments, the coalition made a decision. They would not invade Earth. Their fleets turned away, leaving behind only the memory of their presence. For the humans, it was a moment of both relief and pride. For the galaxy, it was the beginning of a legend. Because word spread quickly. News traveled through trade routes, across hidden channels, and into the halls of power. Earth had been threatened. Earth had been tested. And Earth had not surrendered. It was the first temptation, the first true trial, and humanity had met it not with fear, but with defiance. From that day forward, the whispers grew louder, carrying across the stars. Perhaps this was why no one dared conquer Earth. The fleets that once threatened Earth had turned away, but their presence left a shadow across the planet. The memory of alien warships hanging beyond the skies lingered in every conversation, every broadcast, and every quiet thought. Humanity had stared into the unknown and had not flinched, yet the true strength of what had happened was only beginning to unfold. For most civilizations in the galaxy, being tested by a stronger enemy meant fear would linger for generations. Entire cultures had broken down after such encounters, living in constant dread of the day the invaders might return. But humanity was different. Instead of shrinking under the weight of the threat, they seemed to stand taller. The fear was there, yes, but so was something else, something brighter. Across the planet, people began to tell stories. Parents told their children about the weeks when humanity stood together. Journalists wrote about the courage of ordinary workers who had helped prepare defenses. Students studied every broadcast that had been made, memorizing the words spoken in defiance. It became more than a memory. It became a seed. That seed grew quickly. It wasn't about weapons or armies. It was about spirit. People who once argued about everything under the sun now found moments of agreement. They realized that, for all their differences, they shared one planet, one home. And when that home was threatened, they had discovered something they didn't always see in themselves: unity. This unity was strange to outside observers. Alien scouts, still watching from the dark edges of space, expected humanity to fall back into old habits once the immediate danger was gone. They expected divisions to tear open again, the way cracks returned to stone after pressure passed. But what they witnessed was the opposite. Humans argued, yes, arguing was in their nature, but the arguments were different now. They were not about who should control more power or who deserved more land. They were about survival, preparation, and responsibility. Leaders asked questions like, what if they return? What if the next fleet does not hesitate? What do we do then? The galaxy underestimated how humans responded to challenges. Where others grew timid, humans grew inventive. Where others surrendered, humans adapted. It was not just governments making changes. Ordinary people began experimenting, inventing, and creating. New machines were designed in small workshops, strange strategies were written down on scraps of paper, and bold ideas were debated late into the night. And more importantly, humanity did something few other species ever dared. They laughed, not out of arrogance, but out of resilience. Jokes spread about the visitors who ran away, cartoons appeared in newspapers, and comedians stood on stages making light of the greatest threat their planet had ever seen. This ability to turn fear into humor, to carry heavy burdens with a smile, baffled alien observers. To them, such behavior was madness. To humans, it was survival. But the heart of the human spirit was not just laughter. It was the way they carried one another. When some felt fear, others lifted them up. When despair threatened to creep in, stories of courage were shared. A farmer in one corner of the world could inspire a soldier on the other side with a simple tale of refusing to give up. A teacher's words in a small classroom could echo across the planet when retold through the news. The galaxy began to realize something dangerous about humans. Their strength was not measured in weapons, but in will. Empires had collapsed before because their people had no spirit to fight once their fleets were destroyed. But even without fleets, even without shields, humanity had shown a refusal to break. And that refusal had a history. Those who studied Earth closely began to uncover patterns. Time and time again, humanity had faced disasters that could have ended them. Plagues, wars, natural catastrophes. Yet each time, they found a way to rise again. Each time, they carried scars, but those scars became part of their strength. It was said that humans were fragile, and in many ways they were. Their bodies could not survive extreme heat or cold without protection. They were not the fastest or the strongest among the stars, but what they lacked in physical advantage, they made up for with something no one could calculate: determination. When a human fell, another would reach out to lift them. When a group was cornered, they found paths no one else could see. And when they were told something was impossible, they pushed against the boundary until, somehow, it became possible. The coalition of warlords that had once been tempted by Earth began to reconsider their view. To them, conquering meant more than just taking resources. It meant controlling the spirit of a people. And humanity's spirit, they now understood, was unbreakable. To try and cage it would be to ignite a fire that could burn across the stars. The most troubling realization came from their own spies. Even after the fleets left, humans did not relax. They did not assume the danger was gone forever. Instead, they prepared harder. They trained, they studied, they imagined. Humanity did not fear the future. They looked it in the eye. Other civilizations watched too. Some were amazed, some were disturbed, and some were quietly inspired. Small, struggling species whispered among themselves, "If Earth can resist, maybe we can too." The story of human defiance began to travel further than warships ever could, but inside humanity itself, there was no sense of triumph. They did not believe they had won anything. What they felt instead was a deep awareness. They had been tested once, and that test had been survived only by unity and spirit. If the next test came, it might be harsher. And so, instead of resting, they carried forward with determination. Every culture on Earth expressed this spirit differently. Some turned to faith, believing a higher power had given them strength. Some turned to science, racing to improve their knowledge of the universe. Some turned to art, painting murals of courage, writing songs of resilience, and building monuments to remind future generations of what had happened. Each expression was unique, yet all carried the same message: we will not break. The galaxy began to whisper a phrase that would echo for centuries. Humans are dangerous not because of their weapons, but because of their spirit. Weapons could be destroyed, fleets could be crushed. But spirit? Spirit was fire, and once lit, it was nearly impossible to put out. The human spirit had been tested, and it had shown something the galaxy had not expected. It was not fear that defined them. It was not power. It was the ability to look at the impossible, to feel the weight of it, and still say, "We will endure." And so, Earth's story began to shift. They were no longer just the blue planet with strange, loud creatures. They became a symbol of something larger, a reminder that even the smallest voices could echo across the stars when they refused to be silenced. The fleets had left, but the real battle had only just begun. Not a battle of guns and ships, but a battle of perception, of identity, of spirit. And humanity was ready, because that was who they were. The fleets that once circled Earth had vanished back into the darkness, but their shadow remained. Humanity looked to the stars differently now. Where once the night sky had inspired only wonder and curiosity, it now carried a weight. Every glimmering point of light might hide something watching, something waiting. Fear was there, sharp and heavy, but it did not control them. Instead, it became a teacher. Fear was not new to humans. They had carried it since their earliest days, when survival meant hearing a branch snap in the forest and deciding whether it was the wind or a predator. Fear had saved lives then, and it still had lessons to offer now. Yet the aliens who watched, Earth could not understand this. To them, fear was weakness. Entire civilizations had been broken by the memory of one terrifying moment. Empires that once thrived vanished because their people never recovered from the shadow of defeat. But on Earth, something different happened. People admitted they were afraid, but they did not run from it. They faced it. In villages, towns, and cities, people spoke about the days when the sky seemed ready to open in fire. They told each other, "Yes, I was afraid, but so was everyone else, and we stood anyway." That admission was not shame. It was strength. It told children that fear was natural, but giving up was not. Alien observers found this baffling. In their eyes, fear should paralyze, not inspire. They tried to understand by sending reports back to their councils. The humans do not hide their fear. They carry it openly, and somehow it does not weaken them. It sharpens them. The truth was that humans had always lived this way. Fear had never been separate from their progress. It was often the spark behind it. Fear of hunger drove them to plant crops. Fear of storms pushed them to build shelters. Fear of the unknown sent them exploring seas, mountains, and eventually, the stars. Fear for them was not a chain. It was a compass. And now, faced with threats from beyond the stars, humanity once again turned fear into fuel. Governments began building stronger defenses, but ordinary people were just as determined. In workshops, inventors sketched designs late into the night. Students stayed awake reading about survival and space. Families stored food and supplies, not because they wanted to live in dread, but because preparation made them feel ready. Each step, no matter how small, transformed fear into courage. But perhaps the greatest lesson in fear was not preparation. It was compassion. In the darkest hours, when many believed Earth's end was near, people had turned to one another. Neighbors, who had once barely spoken, shared food. Strangers comforted each other in shelters. Families far apart connected through calls and messages, reminding one another that they were not alone. Fear could have made them selfish, but instead, it reminded them of their shared humanity. This, too, confused alien minds. In their histories, fear usually tore people apart. The stronger preyed on the weaker. The powerful abandoned the powerless. But humans seemed to lean closer to one another when the danger grew. Their instinct to protect was just as strong as their instinct to survive. The lesson spread far beyond Earth. Small species scattered across the galaxy heard whispers of it. The humans stood together, even when they were afraid. Those whispers carried hope. If humanity could endure the gaze of great fleets and not crumble, perhaps others could as well. Of course, fear still lingered in every home on Earth. Children sometimes woke crying from dreams of burning skies. Farmers looked at their crops and wondered if they would live to harvest them. Workers stared at the horizon and asked themselves if tomorrow would bring war. Fear was real, constant, heavy. But every time it appeared, people found ways to use it. A teacher told her class that fear meant they cared about living. A soldier explained that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand anyway. A doctor reassured patients that fear reminded them their lives had meaning. Slowly, those lessons became part of everyday speech. Humanity was teaching itself how to carry fear without being crushed by it. The galaxy was not ready for this truth. Races that had watched humanity expected their spirit to shatter after the first great test, but instead the humans grew sharper, like steel being forged. Fear did not melt them, it hardened them, and this realization unsettled those who once thought Earth would be easy prey. What made humanity so different? Scholars across the stars debated it endlessly. Some said it was their history, filled with struggle upon struggle. Others said it was their strange ability to imagine futures, to dream of what came after fear. And some whispered a more dangerous thought, that perhaps humanity had learned to make friends with fear itself. Back on Earth, life was slowly returning to its routines, but it was not the same as before. People worked harder, dreamed bigger, and looked at the sky with sharper eyes. Even laughter carried new strength. Jokes about the visitors who turned away were told again and again, not to mock the danger, but to remind themselves that they had faced it and survived. Humor became another weapon against despair. Children grew up hearing two lessons: do not be ashamed of fear and never let it rule you. These children carried those words into their studies, their games, and their dreams. They began to imagine futures where humanity not only survived but thrived among the stars, and so Earth stood changed, not destroyed, not conquered, but transformed. Fear had not defeated them. It had taught them. And in learning those lessons, they had become something stronger than they had ever been before. The galaxy began to whisper a new warning. To threaten Earth is to risk awakening the very spirit that fear cannot break. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer just a small voice in a vast galaxy. They had become a story that others carried, repeated, and believed in, and the core of that story was simple. Fear was not the end. Fear was the beginning. The fleets had gone. The sky was once again silent, and Earth rotated in peace under the watch of countless stars. But things were not the same as before. Humanity had changed, and the galaxy had changed with them. What had started as curiosity, then turned into temptation and fear, ended as something far more lasting, a legacy. The story of Earth spread across space faster than any ship could travel. Whispers became tales, and tales became warnings. No one dared to laugh at the humans anymore. No one spoke of them as weak or defenseless. Instead, their name carried a weight, a sense of respect that few species ever earned so quickly. For the humans, it was not about pride or boasting. They did not stand on rooftops declaring themselves invincible. They simply returned to their lives, to their work, their families, and their dreams. They still planted crops, still built machines, still sang songs under the open sky. To them, survival was not a victory parade. It was living another day with purpose. Yet the galaxy could not ignore them. Messages passed between distant worlds, carried by merchants and travelers. The humans endure. The humans resist. The humans are not to be underestimated. What fascinated many species was not Earth's weapons or technology, because compared to galactic empires, those were still modest. What earned humanity respect was their spirit. They had shown that strength was not only in firepower, but in unity, resilience, and the courage to stand even when the odds seemed impossible. Alien scholars wrote papers trying to explain it. Some said humans had evolved differently because their world was so unpredictable. Storms, earthquakes, wild predators, diseases. Life on Earth had never been safe, so humans had learned to adapt. Others believed it was their strange emotions, the way they mixed fear with hope, pain with laughter, and despair with determination. But no one could deny the truth. Humanity had carved out a place in galactic memory. The respect they gained did not come from conquest. It came from defiance, and that made it stronger. For small species across the stars, Earth became a symbol, Worlds that had lived under the shadow of larger empires began to believe they too could endure. Stories of humans standing tall, even. When fleets threatened them, spread like sparks in dry grass. Those sparks lit fires of courage. Whole civilizations began teaching their children. Be like the humans. Do not bow too easily. Stand even when afraid. On Earth, life was slower but filled with quiet pride. People did not forget the fear they had felt, but they remembered how they had faced it. That memory became part of their culture, woven into books, songs, films, and stories told around dinner tables. Generations to come would grow up knowing that when the galaxy tested their world, they did not collapse, they endured. And slowly, humanity began to look outward again. Scientists returned to building telescopes and rockets, not only to prepare for danger but also to explore. Curiosity was not gone. It was stronger. The fear of the unknown had not crushed their hunger to discover. It had only sharpened it. They wanted to meet the galaxy not as victims or prey, but as equals. The aliens, too, began to look at Earth differently. Traders who once avoided the planet started to arrive, cautiously at first, then more openly. They brought strange foods, metals, and knowledge, and in return, they took back stories of human art, music, and laughter. Many were surprised by what they found. They expected a world hardened into silence, scarred by fear. Instead, they found a people who still celebrated birthdays, who still danced, who still painted pictures of the sky. Respect deepened. It was one thing to survive fear. It was another to continue living joyfully after it. There were still those who considered testing Earth again, but they hesitated. Not because of Earth's weapons, but because of what the name human now meant across the stars. To attack Earth would not only be a battle, it would be a message to every other small species. If you destroy them, you destroy hope itself. No empire wanted to carry that burden. This unspoken shield, respect, became Earth's greatest defense. Ships no longer hovered in threatening silence. Instead, they passed by at a distance, aware that the planet below was not a helpless rock, but a symbol too powerful to touch. For humanity, the legacy was not only about safety, it was about dignity. They had shown themselves and others that they were more than fragile creatures on a blue planet. They were part of something greater, a story written across the galaxy. And that story was about resilience. Years passed, and the day came when humans set foot on other worlds, not as conquerors but as explorers, workers, and allies. Wherever they went, they were greeted with a cautious kind of respect. Some welcomed them warmly, others kept their distance, but no one treated them as prey. Children on faraway planets learned about Earth in their schools. Teachers told them how humans had once faced fleets in the sky and still refused to kneel. The young grew up with pictures of Earth's blue oceans and green forests, not only as a distant planet but as a symbol of courage. On Earth itself, grandparents told their grandchildren stories of the nights when people held their breath, waiting for fire to fall from the sky, and how those nights passed because humanity did not give up. Those children grew up with pride, not arrogance, but a steady pride that told them, "We come from survivors. We come from dreamers. We come from those who faced fear and turned it into strength." And so, Earth's place in the galaxy was secured, not through weapons, not through conquest, but through respect. That respect became a bridge. When other civilizations faced their own trials, they looked to humanity as proof that the smallest voice could still echo loudly. When leaders considered giving up, they remembered Earth. When people trembled under the weight of fear, they whispered, the story of the humans who stood beneath fleets and still found the will to laugh, sing, and live. In this way, the legacy of humanity was not just about defending themselves. It was about giving courage to others. The galaxy no longer saw Earth as defenseless. They saw it as untouchable. not because no weapon could harm it, but because no force could erase what it represented. And so the silent planet under the stars carried with it a legacy that would last for generations. A legacy of respect.